And joining us for more on the worsening tensions in the Middle East is Stephen Zunes, Professor of Politics, Director of Middle Eastern Studies at the University of San Francisco. Professor, good to have you back on the show with us. I want to start by asking you about the Operation Midnight Hammer, the U.S. insisting it's once and done. But isn't that mostly on Iran and how it decides to react?
Certainly, Iran has repeatedly maintained their right to retaliate if attacked. And this idea that the United States should just go boom, 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 and then have peace, as President Trump was saying last night, seems highly unrealistic. There are over 40,000 American troops within a couple hundred kilometers of Iran, not to mention ships in the Persian Gulf and nearby in the Arabian Sea, not far from the Iranian coast. There are armed Shia militia, essentially proxies of the Iranian armed forces in Iraq that could attack U.S. Troops there. And even though Iran's missile capabilities and other military assets have been seriously compromised after 9 days of Israeli attacks, I would assume that they would have at least enough in their arsenal to inflict at least some damage if they chose to do so.
And Professor, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but just very quickly, was the 2-week deadline always a ruse? We know it took nearly 40 hours for the B-2s to fly from Missouri to the Gulf, not to mention all the steps that were outlined by Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff as well. We had Israel taking out air defenses along the way ahead of the operation. So it sounds like, this is something that was planned weeks in advance, coordinated weeks in advance as well.
Very much so. Indeed, the very fact that the Trump administration was claiming that the talks would be continuing and hinting that they disapproved of Israel taking military actions, when in fact it does appear that they were in cahoots from the very beginning.
Professor, as we wait Tehran's response, can Tehran even afford to escalate right now? I mean, given its depleted missiles, stockpiles, air defenses, and also a weakened proxy network?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think if they do have the capability, they would be very tempted to use what they have. Now, President Trump did threaten some major serious consequences, bombing far worse than they've even experienced so far by Israeli forces. So there may be some calculation as whether the principle of fighting back is worth the enormous damage that could be done to the country, both its military and civilian infrastructure. At the same time, they'd be loath to just sort of quietly back off right now. Recall, this is a country that has been a major regional power for 2,500 years. This is not some poor Caribbean or Central American country where the U.S. has been able to walk over without much consequences historically. And given what's at stake here, I really would expect that it is likely there's going to be some kind of response, and then very likely a further escalation by the United States.
Professor, I want to ask you about the signals from Iran so far and how much it's going to depend, if you like, on the kind of support it receives from allies like Russia. We know the foreign minister is going there. We've had words of support, condemnation from China as well, and there's a question mark about Pakistan. How much of that is going to factor into, what Tehran eventually decides to do?
Well, on the one hand, Iran has kind of a bad reputation. It's something of a pariah state, and even countries like Russia and China are somewhat embarrassed by them. I doubt they'd sacrifice much or risk too much coming to their defense. At the same time, I think both are very concerned about the unilateral nature of the Israeli and U.S. attacks, and the idea that if the United States can get away with this, in violation of the UN Charter, indeed in violation of the U.S. Constitution, since Trump did not get the approval of Congress or anything. There may be a fear that he could take this as a blank check for further unilateral military action elsewhere. So, despite the concerns about the Iranian regime by their erstwhile allies, I would be surprised if they would discourage Iran from taking some kind of action. I just don't expect much direct involvement by these countries themselves.
Speaking of Iran's actions, we know that Iran's parliament has passed a motion on closing the Strait of Hormuz. If, Professor, Iran actually moves to shut down the waterway or targets U.S. assets in the Gulf, what kind of response would you expect from Washington?
I think there'd be a massive response. Trump has threatened so, and the United States certainly has the firepower in the region, especially when bringing in the additional carrier group to respond militarily. The concern, of course, is how far would this go? Even if Iran was not able to formally close the straits, I can't imagine that, for example, an insurer would support tankers going through if it was an active war zone. And so even if there wasn't a full closure by the Iranians, even if the United States did respond in a fairly decisive manner, I wouldn't expect there to be free shipping in the Straits or anywhere else in the Gulf region for some time. So we are looking at a pretty serious scenario if the Iranians take this action. I mean, they would definitely come off worse for it, to be sure. But again, I think they're concerned about precedent. I think they're concerned about national pride. I think they're concerned about making clear to the international community that there is consequence to the kind of attacks against them.
Professor, President Trump again floated the idea of regime change in Iran. How likely is that at this stage? And could the supreme leader's death be a plausible game changer?
Not really. I mean, if Ayatollah Khamenei is killed, I don't think it would be a big shift. He's quite old. I mean, he's not going to live that much longer anyway, and they do have a process of replacing him. In any case, in a war situation like that, in many ways, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard actually have even more power than the Ayatollahs do. But regarding regime change, I mean, a lot of people would like to see a regime change, not the least of which are the Iranians themselves. However, if we look at the history of a regime change against authoritarian regimes, the successful ones anyway, have tended to be from democratic civil society organizations engaging in massive nonviolent civil resistance. When outside powers come in for regime change, as we saw in Iraq and in Libya, it can create chaos. It can create civil war, or sometimes just another dictatorship. And so I really, the Trump administration may talk of regime change. I don't think they can really do much about it, particularly when a country is attacked, people tend to rally around the flag. That's not the time to make revolution. Even Iranians who are very critical of the regime and would like to see it go away, don't like being bombed, and their patriotism, may be more powerful than their desire for a change of government.
Understood, Professor. As we await those battle damage assessments to come in, I'm wondering, how you think the United States and Israel will factor in some of the unknowns right now. I mean, whether they got the enriched stockpile, whether it's been moved, is there a secret site or sites which could possibly allow Iran to continue making nuclear weapons? I mean, how do you see, these allies taking this?
I mean, the irony is that if the goal really was to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon, all that needed to be done was simply to go back to the Iran nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Program of Action that was signed by Iran and 6 other countries and approved by the United Nations back in 2015. Trump pulled out of it in 2018, and that's what gave Iran the willingness and ability to start reprocessing uranium on a much higher level that does threaten to go off in a militarized direction at some point. So again, if this was concerned about preventing, stopping the nuclear program, the course was diplomatic. This way, even if the Trump administration is correct that there was significant damage, essentially destroying a lot of what they have, the knowledge is still there. They know how to build these things. It will set them back a few years, but they could just start all over again. And indeed, they may redouble their efforts because they may, they may even pull out of the non-proliferation treaty, because you can now make a case to say, hey, we really do need a nuclear deterrent now. Look what happened. That we really do need to go in a military direction. So not only has this been a setback in terms of prospects of regime change, it's actually been a setback in the cause of non-proliferation, and it makes, in my view, it makes Iran more likely, not less likely, to end up developing a nuclear weapon.
All right, Professor Zunes, thank you very much for your time and your insight this morning. Stephen Zunes, Professor of Politics and Director of Middle Eastern Studies at the University of San Francisco.